Feminism is the political practice of fighting male supremacy on behalf of women as a class. This is the best definition of feminism I've read. Start from the end, women as a class. Embedded in here is the assertion that women are a class. We are not a random collection of individuals. We share a common condition. Feminism is a political practice because women's condition is political. It's not personal bad luck. It's not choosing the wrong man. It's not created by evolution, and it wasn't ordained by God. None of these horrors are inevitable. It's one group of humans creating a set of social practices that lets them dominate another group. But the most important part, these three words: fighting male supremacy. The solution is embedded in the problem. If we share a common condition, we can also make common cause. And that group solidarity, that love called sisterhood, can give us the power to dislodge male supremacy. Liberation is possible. Okay. I know, I'm really sorry. That's because I'm looking at the wrong thing on your screen, but I have figured that out. This is two computers at once. Okay, how old is patriarchy? How did all this happen? That's the question most women have when we come to consciousness. Has it always been like this? If not, where did patriarchy come from? And more importantly, if not, that implies we really can do something about it. So there's been a lot of research and scholarship about that question, and some of it is through a feminist lens. So I'm going to start at the beginning. 4 million years ago, don't worry, I'm going to go fast. Homo habilis uses stone tools and has a brain the size of a chimpanzee. Over the next million years, so it's a long time in the making, habilis undergoes a process called encephalization. And their cranial capacity doubled, and Homo erectus emerges. And Homo erectus migrates out of Africa about 1.8 million years ago. And they're the first to use fire and more complex tools. Homo sapiens appears about 400,000 years ago, and by 200,000 years ago, identical to modern humans. By 100,000 years ago, we're burying our dead, and we're doing it ritualistically. The bodies are positioned, they're painted, they've got grave goods. These are the oldest human burials found to date. This is in Kafsa, which is in modern-day Israel. By 40,000 years ago, we have modern human culture. So people are making clothes from hides, they're making jewelry, musical instruments, and we apparently have always loved octaves, fourths, and fifths. More sophisticated hunting techniques like trapping pits. There's barter, clearly. There's art. What are we painting? Well, we're painting a lot of animals. Pablo Picasso went to see Lascaux before it was closed to the public. His comment when he emerged, "We have invented nothing." Meaning that whole sweep of Western art, nothing was original. It was all there 20,000 years ago. So this is some of the oldest art made by humans. This is a 44,000-year-old cave painting in Indonesia. The image portrays a group of part human, part animal figures. They're called therianthropes, hunting large animals with either spears or ropes. The prehistoric cave art provides some of the most direct insight available into the earliest storytelling. So there's a few 100,000 years where people are painting things that are static and certainly symbolic, that clearly held meaning for them. You see the same images over and over, but they weren't stories. Okay, so there's dots, there's lines, circles, lots of handprints, and lots of vulvas. But it's not a story. This is a story, and there's a lot going on. The therianthropes, the half human, half animals, they've got bird heads and human bodies. They have a quadruped body and a human head. Why? Like, what is this expressing? There's something in here about still being animal, yet being human, but also still animal. This is a story they're telling. And note how tiny the humans are compared to that's called an anora, that animal. It's like those Japanese paintings where there's this enormous wave and the little tiny person, or a huge mountainscape and the little tiny person. What looms large psychologically and spiritually is the animal, and its presence is enormous. Oh, a blank slide. We have a format problem because this is PowerPoint and she has a Mac, so some of my slides might not turn up. Anyway, it's a fairly small little ruminant. It's like basically a the largest goat you can think of is about the size of an anora. So it's not that big in real life, but yet in the picture, it's just the story. It's the enormous creature. This is in Zimbabwe. It's sort of similar, you know. This one has always intrigued me. This is clearly some kind of ritual. You've got this woman with a rattling at the bottom. So, and then the woman at the top has some kind of a pose that she's striking. And then in front of the two women are these men who are hunting. And that one animal is turned toward the hunter. And this is such a common thing where you call the animal to you, that you approach in humbleness and say, oh, you know, little brother, little sister, we are weak humans. Please feed our people. I don't know that that's what's going on, but this seems to me that's what's going on in this picture. It's some version of that. And clearly, this is what humans are thinking about for 200,000 years. This is the moment of the transformation from life into death. And the second most common art project, here she is. This is the so-called Venus of Holofels. A lot of us object to Venus as trivializing. Venus, of course, being the goddess of love and beauty, which is what women are always reduced to in patriarchy. When a photo of this carving was published in Nature, it ran with the caption, prehistoric pinup. Yeah, prehistoric pinup. And when the Huffington Post ran it, prehistoric porn, they went all the way. They can't even let us escape intellectually from their porn-sick epistemology. Now, the religious implications of these artworks are dubbed, quote, a fertility cult. This is not a fertility cult. It's a complex theological consciousness, and it deserves a little respect. So this goddess was found in southern Germany. She's between 35 and 40,000 years old. She is, in fact, the oldest piece of sculptural art ever found. Okay, she's the oldest one that we know of. She's carved from a woolly mammoth tusk, and it probably took a few hundred hours to carve her. And this is what she looks like in a hand. You see how small she is. Probably worn as a pendant. That's why she doesn't have a head. The oldest known musical instrument was found near her, and that was a flute carved from a vulture bone. And there are the remains of the usual reindeer and cave bear, ibex, woolly mammoths, all the animals that people were eating. So the first art we ever made was of the megafauna and the megafemales, because that was who gave us life. I think this is the beginning of religion, and that sacredness of awe and thanksgiving is built into us, body and brain. So these images, this consciousness, is so primary that it carries from the Paleolithic through the Neolithic and into the present day. So Paleolithic just means before agriculture, and Neolithic means after the invention of agriculture. So this is sort of this, you know, this timeline now of humans. And so here's some Neolithic art. So the Paleolithic is over. They've taken up agriculture. So these are from the agricultural societies that came next. Oh man, another blank one. One of the oldest agricultural settlements is Çatalhöyük. It's in Turkey, and the excavation is ongoing. And the image shows this enormous woman seated on a throne, and she's got huge lions on either side of her. Okay, so that's what you're missing here. 95% of the images that are dug up there are animals, and 5% are females. And they say themselves that representations of male are extremely rare. So it's the same template as the Paleolithic art, right? It's basically the same image, the megafauna and the megafemales. This is what they're making. So this is Hathor from Egypt. Again, here she is, the megafauna, the megafemales. Cultures don't become patriarchal overnight, and even when that transition is complete, people still don't give up these biophilic religious images. So now we're well into patriarchy here in the Mediterranean region, but here's Artemis, again, with the megafauna. Here's another Artemis, same animals, and here she is finally. Now she's Diana in Rome, but it's the same image. And still, your basic nativity scene, one of the central motifs of Western art, and it's a woman front and center, bringing forth life on her own in this dark cave of a stable, surrounded by that same magic megafauna. There's the animal with the horns. In the folk culture of Europe, you know, the animals can talk on Christmas Eve. So this is just a totally magical scene that goes back just profoundly into our psychology. We have indeed invented nothing. And for all that time, for 2.5 million years, we were not monsters and destroyers. We were participants. St. Mary, here we are. So this is Monica Shu and Barbara Moore, this amazing book, if you've never read it. This is the artwork, God Giving Birth. So here's a quote. The evidence leaves no doubt that these images were at the origins of what we call human psychology, psychological and spiritual expression. The evidence is irrefutable. It shows with clarity and in the solidity of stone and bone that the first 30,000 years of Homo sapiens' existence was dominated by a celebration of the female processes, the mysteries of menstruation, pregnancy, and childbirth, of the analogous abundance of the earth, of the seasonal movement of animals and the cycles of time in the great round of the mother. If our whole time on earth is the length of that football field, 1/3 of a yard is where the disaster begins. So for most of our time on earth, we lived in small band societies, probably matrilineal, of about 100 people. They governed themselves using face-to-face discussions. If disagreements were too intense, some of them left the band. Social psychologists acknowledge that 100, somewhere in there, is about the magic number. Any more, and this type of decision-making just falls apart. Conflict resolution breaks down and becomes unworkable. It's too many relationships for anyone to manage. But in small groups, yes, that's how we made decisions. And that's why hunter-gatherers are classified as egalitarian. People in bands see themselves as basically equal and capable of making decisions. Robert Dahl calls this the logic of equality. It's more likely than not in small groups, and it's probably the most natural political system for humans. It's not always perfect. Some of these societies can be rigidly patriarchal and militaristic, but they don't have a highly structured hierarchy. They don't need one. So this is Gerda Lerner. You've got to read this book. It is precisely in hunting and gathering societies that we find many examples of complementarity between the sexes and societies in which women have relatively high status, which is in direct contradiction to the claims of man the hunter school of thought. So humans go from more or less egalitarian cultures as hunter-gatherers to hierarchical, stratified, and patriarchal cultures as agriculturalists, as farmers. This is more Gerda Lerner. They comb through accounts. Oh no, it's not. That's the next slide. This side. They comb through accounts from as far back as the 1800s through to the present day, and their finding is in almost 80% of the societies, there's data for women hunting. And this wasn't just women killing some animal that women happened upon. The hunting was purposeful. Women had their own toolkit. They had favorite weapons. And as it turns out, grandmas were the best hunters of the village. And in about 1/3 of these cases, the women were hunting large mammals. The reason the grandmas were the best was because it's about human management. The women were able to gather together the correct number of people and the kind of people that you wanted to go and have a good hunt. So it's like, oh, this guy's a really good tracker. I want him. So you go and you talk to him. Hey, what about tomorrow? How you feeling? Can you come? Well, his best friend, blah, blah, blah. And she manages the relationships. She puts together the best party with the best people who have the best skills, who get along, who know what they're doing. And that's how this happens. It's not particularly about the skill of one person. It's about managing the entire group and getting the people you need to do the thing that needs doing, which is feed everybody. And the women were the best at this. They are today. They always will be. We all know this is true. So grandma was the best hunter. What's that?
Don't female lions? They're the hunters.
Oh, absolutely. The male lions do nothing. They just sit around most of the time. And the female lions will tolerate one because they want babies. They will never tolerate more than another one. No, that's it. They don't hunt. It's the females that hunt. Yep. Okay, back to Gerda Lerner. The process we are now discussing occurs at different times in different parts of the world, yet it shows regularity of causes and outcome. Approximately at the time when hunting, gathering, or horticulture gives way to agriculture, kinship arrangements tend to shift away from matrilineal to patrilineal, and private property develops. Why? Well, Jared Diamond, who won a Pulitzer Prize for his book Guns, Germs, and Steel, he says that agriculture was the worst mistake the human race has ever made. Quote, the adoption of agriculture, supposedly our most decisive step toward a better life, was in many ways a catastrophe from which we have never recovered. With agriculture came the gross social and sexual inequality. I so appreciate that he gets this as patriarchy, because most of these guys don't, and he just says it outright. Sexual inequality, the disease and despotism that curse our existence. So here's why. You have to understand what agriculture is. So in very brute terms, you take a piece of land, you clear every living thing off it, and I mean down to the bacteria, and then you plant it to human use. So it's biotic cleansing. That's not agriculture on a bad day. That's not agriculture done poorly. That's what agriculture is. So the first problem, it lets the human population grow to some really big numbers, because instead of sharing that land with millions of other creatures, you're only growing humans on it. Second big problem, you're destroying the soil. And soil is the basis of life, at least land life. We owe our existence to 6 inches of soil and the fact that it rains. So, except for the last 46 remaining hunter gatherers, the human race has made itself dependent on agriculture, on this activity that is literally killing the planet. And this is not a plan with the future, it's drawdown. And what you're drawing down is fossil soil. To give you a number, one season of planting your basic grain crop, so corn or wheat or soy or whatever, you can destroy 2,000 years of soil in one season. So on the first day of the Dust Bowl, this is what you're looking at. There were farms in South Dakota that lost all their soil in one day. And here it is in the sky. The soil was, these dust storms, it was so bad. It covered Washington, D.C. in this like grimy grit. And halfway across the Atlantic Ocean, there were ships that had this soil dumped on them. So, drawdown in a big way. Agriculture is also a drawdown of fossil water, and it's drawdown of species, and in fact, it's drawdown of entire ecosystems.
Wait, when was that?
This was the, what, 1932, somewhere in there, yeah. So this is Iraq, one of the places where agriculture started. No one in their right mind would call this place the Fertile Crescent now. Here's Iran, 94% of the land is degraded. That's not a mountain in the background, that's soil. Pakistan, 1/3 is under risk of desertification. 150 years ago, this was a teak forest, a deciduous forest. And this is what it looks like now. So, agriculture has run through every continent, all of them except Antarctica. But that's okay. We're going to get that one with global warming. Actually, agriculture marks the beginning of global warming. And it's also the beginning of militarism, and it's the beginning of slavery. So, in maybe 14 centers around the world where agriculture started, and we have another blank slide, it was this great map of all the places, human society follows the same pattern. And there's a name for this. It's called civilization. So that word just means people living in cities, right? And what that actually means is that they need more than they can give.
And ownership.
So the food, water, and energy, they have to come from somewhere else because you've used up your own. So from that point forward, it doesn't matter what beautiful, lovely, nonviolent values you might hold in your heart, that society is dependent on imperialism and genocide because no one willingly gives up their land, their water, their trees, their fish. But the city has used up its own. So it has to go out and get those from somewhere else. And that's the last 10,000 years in like 5 sentences. So central concept here is drawdown. If you use more wood than a forest can grow, eventually the forest is gone. If you take fish faster than they can reproduce, one day that river will be nothing but water and sorrow. So the pattern of civilization is this bloated power center surrounded by conquered colonies from which the center extracts what it wants. So this is Greek. You can see this was a navy, based on the they can navigate, around here, and that was what sort of propelled the whole thing. But this particular area, it's like one after another. The first one rises, it falls. The next one comes. If you get the Greeks, you get the Phoenicians, blah blah, on and on, into Rome, into ancient Rome, and then that one collapses. But they eventually just deforest this entire region. It's what it looks like today, and it's because they killed it. Agricultural societies end up militarized. And they always do for 3 reasons. 1, agriculture creates a surplus, and that surplus needs to be protected. If it can be stored, it can be stolen. So you need soldiers to protect it. 2 is imperialism. Agriculture is essentially a war against the natural world, and it is inherently destructive. So eventually the agriculturalists need more land, water, topsoil, whatever. There's an entire class of people whose job is war. Their entire job is taking land and resources by force. Agriculture makes that possible. It also makes it inevitable. And number 3 is, of course, slavery. This is Mesopotamia. Some of those resources are other humans. So agriculture is also backbreaking labor. Hunter-gatherers only work about 17 hours a week to provide for their basic needs. For farmers, it never ends. So for anyone to have leisure, they need slaves. And this is why slavery always follows agriculture. We've lost the cultural memory of this because we've been using fossil fuel to do that work. But if the amount of energy used by the average American, all of us, had to be produced by humans, we would each need 300 slaves. And nobody but emperors ever had that many slaves before. So these are called ghost slaves. That oil is not going to last, but that's a whole nother discussion. But of course, once you have huge numbers of the population in slavery, you need someone to keep them there. And those people are called soldiers. So this is the cycle we've been on for 10,000 years. By the year 1800, when the fossil fuel age begins, fully three-quarters of the people alive on this planet were living in some form of indenture, serfdom, or slavery. My great-grandfather was a serf.
What
Um,
percentage?
three quarters,
75%.
three quarters, 75% of the humans alive on the planet were living like this. Yeah. The only reason we've forgotten this is because we've been using machines. But I guarantee you, when the oil wears out, we're going to remember. So this is Egypt. This is a slave woman, and the skeletons tell an extremely grim story. She would have spent 12, 14 hours a day in this position grinding grain for bread. And they're just riddled with arthritis, their spines, their knees, their hips, from just doing this over and over and over again. And they were disposable, so nobody cared. And so, of course, once you have large numbers of the population in slavery, you got the soldiers. So this is the famous. There's a whole story about this image that was, this guy makes this drawing to explain to people, oh, how to pack the most number of slaves. It's a very famous image into the hull of a ship, to bring them from Africa. And this is the first time in modern history, because the technology got good enough for printing, that political activists use an image to affect their campaign. So the abolition people are as horrified as you or I when they see. I remember seeing this when I was 12 in history class, and I was just traumatized for 2 weeks. It was so hideous. But they took it and they printed thousands and thousands and thousands of these. And if you were an abolitionist, you had to put this everywhere. So you would have it hanging above your sofa in your living room. So when people came over, they had to see it. If you owned a restaurant or a bar, you put this behind the counter, you put it in your front window. If you owned a dress shop, you made sure everybody saw what was going on. And it's the first time that's ever done, as far as we know, in all of history, that they used an image to evoke an emotional response to get a political action to happen. And they were very successful activists, as we know. Anyway, yeah, stickering, right? We do it still. But here's why the agriculturalists always win. If you're willing to destroy your forest, you will win against the people who aren't willing to destroy theirs. It takes 600 old growth trees to make one of these ships. 600. That's why there's no trees left in the Mediterranean. This is what they did with their trees, and they conquered their neighbors. So, having destroyed your forest, you'll have to conquer people still living with their forest so you can take their trees. And again, this is the last 10,000 years. So, I need to introduce you to Susan Griffin. These are the books that she's written. Her article, it was called Rape, the All-American Crime, was published in 1971 in Ramparts magazine, which was a lefty journal. It was the first time an analysis of rape was made. Rape as a political act. And in 1971, she got that published. So this was an absolute watershed moment in the culture. And she expanded it into a book called Rape, the Power of Consciousness, which is the first book written about rape. She's had an illustrious career. She received a MacArthur Grant, NEA Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship. She won an Emmy Award. She was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize. She got all this done with a radical feminist analysis. So no other radical feminist has come close to what just the acclaim that she has won. And yeah, she just seems to have disappeared. Like nobody ever talks about her. She's still alive. But her work, as usual, they just disappear us. So this book is the one, Woman in Nature. You got to read it. She shows how women have been identified with the earth, starting from Plato's division of the world into spirit and matter. She shows how Western philosophy and science have been a project of power over women in nature. And she draws on a vast array of sources, from the Bible to medical texts to literature to scientific journals. The book is like this mythic journey that she takes you on. And she writes about the book that, quote, "It's my own interpretation of the history of science, revealing how science developed with the social construct that women are inferior and that nature is inferior and that they are inferior in the same way because they are wild and emotional and sensual." So it's not a polemical text or a political manifesto. It's much more mythic. It's like this journey to confront what has gone so horribly wrong over the last 6,000 years. But this is a quote from the book, and this is about farming and about what it does to the land and the patriarchal psychology behind it. He breaks the wilderness. He clears the land of trees, brush, weed. The land is brought under his control. He has turned waste into a garden. Into her soil he places his plow. He labors, he plants, he sows. By the sweat of his brow he makes her yield. He deciphers the secrets of the soil. He knows why she brings forth. He says that the land need no longer lie fallow, that what went on in her quietude is no longer a secret, that the ways of the land can be managed, that the farmer can ask whatever he wishes of the land. He replaces the fungi, bacteria, earthworms, insects, decay. So the whole book is like this, and it's just this whole explanation from beginning to end in this just beautiful poetic language. Okay, so civilization has destroyed the planet. It's also destroyed human society, and it's also destroyed human health. So we have an entire concept called the, quote, diseases of civilization, and these are but a few examples. Everywhere the pattern is the same. People take up agriculture and they shrink 6 inches and then their teeth fall out. So this is why an archaeologist can look at a bone and tell you instantly whether it was from a hunter or from a farmer, because the hunter's bones are long and strong and disease-free and still quite dense after thousands of years, and the farmers are falling apart. So yeah, it's not been a great ride here. Back to Jared Diamond. Besides malnutrition, starvation, and epidemic diseases, farming helped bring another curse upon humanity: deep class divisions. Hunter-gatherers have little or no stored food and no concentrated food sources, like an orchard or a herd of cows. They live off the wild, the plants and animals they obtain each day. Therefore, there can be no kings, no class or social parasites who grow fat on food seized from others. Only in farming population could a healthy, non-producing elite set itself above the disease-ridden masses. Skeletons from Greek tombs, 1500 BCE, suggest that royals enjoyed a better diet than commoners, since the royal skeletons were 2 or 3 inches taller and had better teeth on the average, 1 instead of 6 cavities or missing teeth. Among Chilean mummies from AD 1000, the elite were distinguished not only by ornaments and gold hair clips, but also by a 4-fold lower rate of bone lesions caused by disease. This is universal. Okay, so back to Gerda Lerner. In an ecologically constricted space, growing populations can be supplied only by increasing agricultural production or by expansion. The former leads to the development of elites, the latter to the development of militarism, first on a voluntary, then on a professional basis. In Mesopotamia, these social formations took the form of temple towns, which develop in the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE. Under conditions of intertribal warfare, the existence of towns acts as a magnet for the populations of surrounding villages, who migrate to the city to find work or seek protection in times of war or famine. Such populations then become the laborers in the large enterprises, which made possible the construction of huge temple complexes and of centralized irrigation projects. The temple engaged in complex religious, political, and economic activities. Archaeological evidence shows that from 3000 BC on, temple hierarchies coordinated the construction and maintenance of a system of canals that were many miles long and it demanded the cooperation of a number of communities. The financing of such vast enterprises, the maintenance of labor squads paid in rations, and the investment of surpluses in the mass production of certain craft products for export all led to the consolidation of power and the specialization of function in the hands of a temple bureaucracy. So that's how it happens. And this absolutely mirrors Lewis Mumford, who was probably the greatest critique of technology ever. And he says exactly the same thing. He's not a radical feminist. It's a completely different world that he comes out of, and they've come to the same conclusion. A new configuration of technical invention, scientific observation, and centralized political control gave rise to the peculiar mode of life we now identify, without eulogy, as civilization. Its Herculean feats of mechanical organization rested on ruthless physical coercion, forced labor slavery, which brought into existence machines that were capable of exerting thousands of horsepower, centuries before horses were harnessed or wheels invented. It created complex human machines, composed of specialized, standardized, replaceable, interdependent parts: the work army, the military army, the bureaucracy. These work armies and military armies raised the ceiling of human achievement, first in mass construction, the second in mass destruction, both on a scale hitherto inconceivable. This is only a pamphlet that he wrote. It's a booklet. It's maybe 12 pages. His entire argument, they're all the rest of his life's work is just laid out in this authoritarian and democratic techniques. It's all there. He's got it. So he calls the result the megamachine. You may hear people use that word. It's not random. He made it up. And this is the analysis that goes with it. If you ever hear anybody say that, they might not know it came from Lewis Mumford, but that's where it comes from. So it's a seamless suite of centralized political and economic power, science, and technology, whose final goal is, he said it, to displace life. He got it. He got that we were killing the planet. So a technic, that's what he named a technic, It will be either authoritarian or democratic, hierarchical or egalitarian. They are never neutral. Okay? They are patriarchal, hierarchical, militaristic, specialized, and mechanistic. Or, as cellist Glendinning said with spare eloquence, all technologies are political. So Mumford understood that the entire planet was under threat. He said, life itself will not survive unless there is resistance to authoritarian techniques. And this was written in 1964. So we have been warned. Over and over, the Cassandras have been telling us what was coming. So you have Gerda Lerner, Jared Diamond, Lewis Mumford, three very different thinkers with very specific areas of expertise, offering the same critical analysis. The specific pattern called civilization has brought about a disaster for the planet and for human relations, including patriarchy. So, patriarchy comes first, with female enslavement serving as a model for male enslavement. So this is Gerda Lerner's argument. Biological and cultural factors predispose men to enslave women before they learned how to enslave men. Physical terror and coercion, which were essential ingredients in the process of turning free persons into slaves, took for women the form of rape. Women were subdued physically by rape. Once impregnated, they might become psychologically attached to their masters. From this derived the institutionalization of concubinage, which became the social instrument for integrating captive women into the households of their captors, thus assuring their captors not only their loyal services, but those of their offspring. It's honestly ghastly to think about the millions of women over thousands of years who have had to endure this. This is not an easy read. The chapter where she talks about rape and how this was the beginning of slavery is honestly gruesome, but we have to know. So if you've got it in you, I highly recommend this book. So the conquest of civilization over gynocentric egalitarian culture is never just physical. Civilization consumes the culture as well. So, for instance, the very creation myth of Western civilization, not Western culture, which bequeathed us the beauty of the megafauna and the megafemales, but Western civilization that turned to agriculture, it tells men to dominate, to conquer, to go forth and multiply. No hunter-gatherer is told by God to willfully overshoot the land's carrying capacity, and honestly, no marginally rational person would listen to such a God, but here we are. All three of the so-called great religions of the West share that origin story. So that founding myth, it also condemns women to sexual subjugation. Why is not a mystery. Patriarchy becomes a primary feature of civilization because it's about scarcity of land, of labor, of food, and that drives the concept of private property. Matrifocal cultures have little investment in paternity. They often don't know who the father is. Nobody cares. The central social unit is always mother and child. It's not man-wife. The woman's brothers, not her sexual partners, are the men who provide for the children. The male partner is really a kind of a great big nothing burger. This is Sarah Blaffer Hardy. Her main thesis is that human young require extended care for years in order to reach independence. So human females have to find others to help them. Humans aren't just social, we are what she calls a super social group. We need big social skills to survive, and that sociability is built into us by evolution. The primary female skill set of care and connection, once the core of human survival, was reduced in importance when humans established settlements that would require male coalitions to defend them. This led to greater control of females by males. And with the scarcity of agriculture comes private property, which means inheritance and the need to establish male heirs. The valuing of paternity makes male violence inevitable. The only way a man can be sure of his offspring is through total control of a woman's body. No woman is uncertain if she has had a baby. But until DNA testing, no man could be certain if he had fathered a child. Until patriarchy, it didn't matter. No one cared. But all of that changed with private property. So across history, in order to ensure that male children were indeed their sons, men have devised a range of constraints, from restrictions on women's basic freedom of movement to the lifelong tortures of foot binding and FGM. Authoritarian technology needs an authoritarian God, so meaning was drained from the living world for this whole process to happen, and meaning is then placed above in an angry sky god, who reigns rather than participates, punishes instead of heals. And this is what Riane Eisler calls the Dominator society, and her books are about the beginnings of patriarchy and then about the difference between patriarchy and a truly egalitarian gynocentric society, and how we need to create that future. She's still full of hope, so good on her.
Yes, thank you.
We've got to do it. We've got to find it. So she calls societies based on hierarchy dominator societies, and societies based on egalitarian values partnership societies. And these are the main differences. So you have social systems organized as a hierarchy of control, status, and privilege. Rights and freedom to go to those on top, they're denied to those on the bottom. And you only have two possibilities, superior or inferior. That's it. Both parties live in fear. Those on top are fear losing their power. The ones on the bottom, of course, just live in fear. And then, you've just got all that threat of dehumanization and violence that's always, coming down that hierarchy. There's a ranking structure, leads to conflicts that will escalate. And so there's violence and then resentment and then retaliation and then more violence and then you're in the mafia, but this is how it goes. And such societies do not contribute to growth, learning, or peace. Meanwhile, over on the partnership side, you've got an egalitarian organizational structure. Both sexes are seen as equal, even if they're different. Hierarchy of roles may exist, but delegation tends to be based on competency. It's not about an arbitrary grouping that you might be born into. Individuals and groups organized through mutual accountability and responsibility. Empowerment stems from your own contributions. Our deep human past is reflected in her schema. So I think she's exactly right. Now we have Heide Guntner Abendorf. She's the world expert on matriarchal societies. And this book is a comprehensive study of matriarchal societies, both in the past and up to the present. And it's a huge read, but it is well worth it because you'll see the same pattern over and over. So she agrees that matriarchies are true gender egalitarian societies. This applies to the social contribution of both sexes. And even though women are at the center, this principle governs the social functioning and freedom of both sexes. So, patriarchal domination, where a minority emerges from wars of conquest and takes over a whole culture, depends for its power on structures of enforcement, private ownership, colonial rule, and religious conversion. Such patriarchal power structures are a historically recent development, not appearing until about 4000 BCE, and in many parts of the world even later, and increasing in strength throughout the further spread of patriarchy. So she founded the International Academy for Modern Matriarchal Studies and Matriarchal Spirituality in 1986. They've organized 3 world conferences, and you can watch a lot of their presentations online. And she's invited speakers from still extant matriarchal cultures to come and present. So the pictures are beautiful because they're all in their traditional dress. Yeah, go ahead.
Who wrote that book?
So it's her name is Heide Guntner Abendorf. So you can hit me up later and I'll tell you how to spell that. So everywhere that people take up agriculture, society follows this pattern. Okay, so you have the surplus, this temporary surplus created by agriculture, people settle into towns, then cities of hundreds, then thousands, and then now millions of people. Only some people are required to work as food producers. The rest work as priests, soldiers, managers, craftsmen, laborers, and then you got all the serfs and the enslaved people at the bottom, which is pretty much everybody else. Face-to-face conflict resolution is impossible between that number of strangers. It can't be done, especially when the main interaction is economic exchange. They have no reason to care for each other. It's nothing more intimate because it can't be. It's too many people. Okay, it can't happen. So government is invented. Law is invented. For the first time, there's a written code of behavior. We didn't need that until then. The code, the law, it's usually presented as revealed truth. So God says this is how we're supposed to live. It's the voice of the big one. It's both religious and civil. Those haven't been separated yet, and they won't be for a while. But it's backed up by armed power every time. So ancient Athens, one example, is the birthplace of Western democracy. 90% of the population was enslaved. And like we said before, in the year 1800, it was basically 3/4 of the world was some kind of indenture serfdom, slavery. They were not free people. So variations on this, God, king, priest hierarchy, sometimes it gets split up. They figured out, maybe we don't have one person in charge of everything. That's not working out so well. So democracy, roughly defined as the idea that people should govern themselves, has been discussed on and off in the West for about 2,500 years. It's not a straight line of progress. The idea arises in different places. People give it a fledgling try. It collapses and fades. The military takes over. The city is overrun by Visigoths. Religious fundamentalism can reassert itself with claims of royalty, whatever countervailing forces win. But the idea of democracy wasn't brand new in 1776. That's my point. America didn't invent it. First, there was ancient Greek, and that didn't exist as a national entity. They were city states. So the nation state was not a concept. But city states were basically sovereign, what we would call a nation now. And that was the largest political unit that had been invented. So Athens in 500 BCE is the most famous. It's where democracy lasted 200 years until the city was subjugated by Macedonia, and then finally Rome took it on. And just that's Lesbos for the interested there on the red arrow. Democracy is from the Greek word demokratia. It just means the people and rule. So in Athens, the government is an assembly. All citizens are entitled to participate, and then they elect some public officials and sometimes even the generals. But their main method of filling public office was lottery. Well, if everyone's equal, anyone can do the job, so they would just put their names in a hat and pull one out. I don't need to add that no one else has adopted that method, but it's an interesting try. But the political institutions of Athens, yeah, no, that it just, 90% of the people couldn't vote. So it still was not as a democracy as we would like to see it. And all women were, no women were citizens. It wasn't possible to be female and a citizen. So then came Rome. We've got Italy, and they called it a republic. So that's something that belongs to the people, not the king or the priest. So this is an advancement, the people. And at first, only the aristocrats could participate. And this is, whoops, go back. That's the Roman Senate. That's how big it was. The logic of equality led to a lot of struggle on the part of commoners or the plebeians until they also won the right to participate. But still, it was only men, and of course, slavery was still widely practiced. So the Roman Republic, and this is going to be another one of my blank slides, they conquered that same huge chunk of the world, and they annexed a huge area around the Mediterranean, North Africa. Northern Africa was deforested and turned into a desert through Rome needing the grain. Rome conquered all the way to England, didn't make it to Ireland, but they did Roman. And in fact, Egypt was considered personal property of the Roman Empire because the grain that came out of the flooding of the Nile was absolutely crucial to keeping people fed in Italy. So he literally owned Egypt as his personal property. Roman citizenship was often conferred onto conquered peoples, which was new. So it meant huge numbers of people were full citizens. But the weird part about Rome, they never changed the way they organized their government. You had to get to Rome and vote in the assembly. That'd be like us having to travel to Washington to participate. So it didn't work. You couldn't get to the forum. So anyway, that concept would take another 1,000 years or to appear and then another 2,000 to spread. But Caesar conquers, Rome fiddles, Rome burns, popular rule disappears in Southern Europe, and it doesn't appear again until the year 1100. So it's a long time of just things just falling apart. So there's a pattern that democracy follows. It's the aristocrats versus the monarch, and often that original idea is that people can't be taxed without some say. And the suffragists get back to this later. That's why I'm mentioning it here. The logic of equality begins to take hold. If the nobles have a right to self-determination, why not all the wealthy? Why just the nobles? Why not all the landowners? Why not the urban middle class? That's what happens in Florence, in Venice, and in Rome. These people were capable of organizing themselves and of threatening violent uprising until bit by bit they gained their right to govern. And this time period is also marked by enthusiasm for the world of ancient Greece and Rome. So they had this template that's still alive in their minds, in the popular mind, this concept that we had democracy, we can have it again. And in fact, we can expand it. So these were all essentially city-states. And once nationalism took hold, the smaller political units are swallowed up inside larger nation states. But these experiments are very local and they're very participatory. But those get subsumed under larger monarchies and military. So, but it all starts with this idea that the government needs the consent of the governed. This conflicts deeply with the divine right of kings. If the government is by the people and for the people, it's not given by God. And this battle between secularism and theocracy is still raging around the globe, big time. So I'm just going to focus on England for a little bit because it's English history and English common law that laid the basis for the American Constitution. So Charter of Liberties, signed by Henry I, and then Magna Carta, and that was forced from King John. He did not want to sign that thing. But it's the first time in England the barons, so that next level of the aristocracy, is saying, you know what, we have rights too. This is not a one-way flow. So they require the king to renounce certain rules. He has to respect legal procedures. This is where we get habeas corpus and due process. You can't do these things to us. You can't just disappear us. There's going to be a council that you have to listen to, and establishes the principle that the monarch, that all the people who run the government are bound by the law. They're not above it. So there's this two-way flow of the arrows between the king and the barons. Like, you actually owe us, and you can't just do this shit. So Magna Carta plunges England into a civil war. That's how important this is, and they call it the First Barons' War. The Pope immediately released John from his oath to obey it, even though he had signed it. So it should have been a legal document, but you know why he does that? Not because it's treason, because it's blasphemy to say that the king is not in charge and that the king didn't pick God, that the king isn't picked by God. It's blasphemy. And so the Pope said, you don't have to do this, John. It's all okay. But anyway, it's the absolute starting port for secularism and universal human rights. It's a long time ago. We've been fighting this a long time. So I'm going to leave you with a cliffhanger because we got to stop for there's more tomorrow. This goes on all week. So we will eventually get to our girls. Tomorrow we're going to do Christine de Pizan, Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary Shelley, and on into the suffragettes. So we have no time for questions because it's 10:03 and I got a hard stop. So thank you.